The NFL draft is just a couple of weeks away, and we are joined today by Travis May on RotoViz Overtime to talk through wide receivers and tight ends. We are fortunate enough to have Travis for a little bit of time here, and we're going to do wide receivers, tight ends today. We're going to be back with our second show of the week, looking at running backs and quarterbacks. So a bit of a NFL draft deep dive, and nobody better than Travis to get that information from. He's always our go-to at the start kind of the draft season. I know it's only 3 weeks away, but we love to get him in, and we're hoping to have him back on after the NFL draft. Again, you can obviously get him on Twitter at @FF_Travis M. Travis, welcome back to the show. I know myself and Sean are very excited to have you back here.
Hey, glad to always join my RotoViz people and just see you guys again. I know I listen into you guys, so I feel like I hear you guys, but I'm not really talking. I can't talk back to the podcast, so it's good to actually talk back to you guys now. So this is great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun, and I think Sean, Travis may be the most recurring guest on the OT podcast. We aren't a big guest podcast, but Travis may be up there at the top of the list now.
I'll take it. I will take it. It's funny. I guess it was when I started doing some work for RotoViz. I guess it was like early 2019. So yeah, it's. I'm old now, right? I think that's what that means. Something
I think
like
we're
that.
all getting old. I think
probably. We would not. Our dynasty values would not be high if we were in the NFL right now, given our ages.
I mentioned to the guys before we started recording, my voice may not be as strong as it usually is on today's recording. My daughter turned 5 over this past weekend, and you're talking about feeling old. I'm like, where did those 5 years ago? I know that you have a young child in the house as well, so these things move very, very quickly. But Sean, we are jumping into the draft conversation, and I'm going to let you kick it off with the wide receivers. And you made a little bit of I don't know if it was bold, but on our recent show you mentioned JSN and where maybe he should be going in those super flex drafts. So we'll kick it off with your opening stands on JSN here.
Yeah, well, I'm getting to the point where I'm ready to throw it out there that maybe we should be looking at him at the 101, at least in a battle there with Robinson. So we'll see what Travis wants to go on that. Travis, we got a bunch of questions for you about these top guys, letting you put a little detail onto them, and then going to ask you about the sleepers. But before we kind of get to breaking down these individual strengths and weaknesses, things you like, things you don't like, give us a top 5. What are your rankings right now at the top of the receiver group?
I think my top 5, and it's been changing as I've been trying to grapple with a billion things and sift through all the information and project where these guys are actually going to go. But I think it's still Jaxon Smith-Njigba, clear cut 1, and then 2 Jordan Addison, and then 3 I'm ready to just be okay with Zay as my wide receiver 3, and then 4. I'm actually going to say that it is Josh Downs, because he's probably, whereas he might not have the same upside per se, and he has some size questions, I think we just kind of know what he is, and he's got an incredibly safe, proven production profile. So I'll say he's 4, and then 5, I'm just going to go with Mims. Yeah, I've had him just outside my 5 for a while, but I'm done with it. So I know that's not chalk, because I know a lot of people like Quentin, Johnston, and Jalin Hyatt, but that's my 5 as of today.
Well, you mentioned that JSN is the clear-cut 1. That's kind of my first question for you. Are there any things that we should be worried about with him? 1-year wonder status, the injuries, anything with this Ohio State effect? I mean, obviously those guys, his teammates, went to the NFL and looked fantastic. So if anything, you probably look at that as a plus. But anything in here at all that gives you cause for concern? I mean, even the athleticism questions seem to be mostly cleared up. I mean, you obviously love for him to be a 4-3 guy on top of everything else. But anything here that would keep him out of a conversation, maybe to be the overall 101, other than just the uniqueness of Robinson?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the overall 1.01 in any format for me. I love the strong take there, though. But for me, I don't really have many questions with him, and I haven't for a while. He was one of those players when he was a true sophomore. When you break out alongside 2 future first-round picks and you do it in impressive fashion, you have not one, but two different games where you catch 15 passes and you break some records for even Ohio State, which has become, wide receiver U, and really, frankly, has been for quite some time. You're starting to impress me. And I know people want to say, well, he's only a slot. He had 80+% of his snaps in the slot. Is that going to be a problem at the NFL level? I think it was Wilson's sophomore year where he moved more so in the slot. And so people were thinking, he might only be a slot at the next level. And then in the next year, he proved he could actually be a mix of outside and slot. And, there's no questions whether Garrett Wilson is good at this point. And I think it just has to do with where they put the best wide receiver or a particular archetype of wide receiver in that offense to succeed. That's why he was used there. I think he can succeed outside. I think he's not limited to one particular role at the next level. And that's been a common question that I've seen come up on a number of shows. And so if that's the concern, that's not really one of mine. And I know some had questions about his athleticism. And I think at his pro day, he proved to be enough of an athlete at the position that I don't have questions there. And so he's got a fantastic peak to his production profile. He has, proven production alongside future first rounders, which you're going to have to do at the next level. You got to compete against top tier playmakers. And he's just an all around separator as well, just from a film standpoint. So I don't see why there's any argument or how there's any argument as to who the best wide receiver is in the class.
Sean had mentioned the 101. The other part is how good can he be when we're moving forward? You mentioned Garrett Wilson. We've seen how quick he's ascending up dynasty rankings, throughout last season into this offseason. Do you think, Sean again, bold. Sean has put in the notes here, potential to be wide receiver 3 and dynasty in 2024. Are you feeling those vibes?
I don't know if it's that strong. I mean, it's possible though, considering where some of the productive studs that have been around a while are in terms of their age arc. And then, we've got the Justin Jeffersons of the world, the Jamar Chases, and the ascending former teammates of JSN and Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. And those are some of the top candidates to be in the conversation as the top overall wide receiver 1. And so, I think there's definitely a chance that he gets up in that conversation, especially if he's in an offense where, hey, from day one, he's going to be the primary target and they just shove all the targets his way. There's real opportunity for that. So let's just hope he lands in a fantastic spot where he can actually hit the ground running. Like we just saw his 2 former teammates that have been on the record as saying that he is better than them in Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, like they just did this past year. So I don't see, a ton of outcomes where he's not the most productive wide receiver this year out of this class.
It feels like we might just need to have a separate dynasty wide receiver rankings for Ohio State moving forward, just based on the guys that have come out. Jordan Addison, in terms of his production, what he's done at college, any concerns about the size and athleticism coming in with his profile?
Size for sure, but in this day and age, like we were just seeing smaller wide receivers succeed. It's not like they can be Tutu Atwell size or smaller. I wouldn't suggest that any middle schooler step
98 pounds might be too small.
Yeah, 98 pounds is probably a little bit too small. At least triple digits. But we've just seen a trend ever since early 2010s that wide receiver classes as a whole are getting smaller, and this class in general is ridiculously skinny, almost kind of unprecedented. So. Unprecedentedly, and that's too many syllables for me anyway. But it is an odd class for sure. But when he showed up to the combine and he ran like a 4.49 or something like that, and people are like, oh man, that's so disappointing. Like, guys, the average NFL combine time for wide receivers is like 4.52. Yes, we'd love to see a skinnier guy be faster than that, but that's not a problem. Like, he did not have problems separating against the top competition. Or, when he was scoring like 17 touchdowns 2 years ago, or, almost leading the Pac-12 in touchdowns after, being dinged up and missing games. He plays bigger than he is and separates just fine and had a fantastic production profile to prove it. So, I think we're just overthinking it. And once you get to the next level, it's like you can probably add 10 pounds of muscle and be just fine.
Do you have an NFL comp that you like for him that kind of illuminates maybe the upside, the downside. And I guess my other question would be, you mentioned the production at USC with some of the things going on around him. Is there not some disappointment, though, that he didn't put up more explosive numbers after the transfer?
Yeah, and I think part of it has to do with just USC and how they utilize their wide receivers this past year. And even when he was dinged up and missed some time last year, he was still the most productive guy there, and moved offenses, changes quarterback. It's not. I know we love to like plug and play these wide receivers, like it's just kind of like Madden, and it's just there's no learning curve, and there's like that's really hard to do. So I mean, he was playing up with a fantastic quarterback, and I would have loved to see him, ball out even more so. But we just saw, like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Michael Pittman come out of USC. It's a different offense now, but like that spread kind of formation where they're always basically 3-4 wide receivers, and they don't exactly funnel all the targets to one player. And Riley's done that, Lincoln Riley, that is, even when he was back at Oklahoma. Frustratingly so, like even with Marvin Mims or Mario Williams, who ended up following he and Caleb Williams from Oklahoma to USC. He does that. He does not, he doesn't give like 40% of the targets to one player, is what I'm saying. And so I wasn't expecting that to be the outcome for Addison. I'd love to see more, but I just think there's a ceiling in terms of like our typical receiver dominator ratings for these guys in that offense.
So then you had mentioned a couple of guys that you don't have in your top 5. Some guys who, especially with Quentin Johnston, very controversial, at least within the context of him being a potential number 1 for some analysts, and a potential number 1, I think, especially maybe for some NFL teams, but also a guy where you get almost some Treylon Burks vibes in terms of how people are looking at him, where even though there are some things where you're thinking, okay, this is the guy, that he might fall to the back of that group. Burks did that to an extent last year. Johnston could fall outside the first round. You mentioned you have him outside the top 5. Is it a question of ceiling? Is it a question of floor? He seems like he has elements to his profile that really point all over the place.
That's the best way of putting it. I think that's where I'm torn, because you kind of have to squint at the first couple of years. Like, okay, in the games in which he played, he was incredibly productive. Not 40% of the offense, but he was still productive. But why isn't this huge guy scoring more touchdowns? Why is this guy who's like almost 6'4", like why is he body catching all the time and playing smaller than he is, and in contested situations where he's supposed to be this dominant monster, like he's just not. Like he has a worse contested catch rate than guys who are like 5'9" in this class, like guys that I have rated slightly over him. And I think it's because he lacks a lot of the, I don't know, just fundamental things when it comes to the wide receiver position. Like he's a big athletic freak. And he has a fun yak ability that's rare for a guy of his size. And, he's got a good enough analytical profile, I guess we could say. It's just there are questions. There's not the peak of some of the players that we like. There's not the consistency compared to some of the guys that we typically like. And so that's where we have questions. And when you have questions in both the analytical space and the film-based space, and you marry those together, I think I struggle to rate a guy that highly with such confidence, just in general. So he's like my 6. But so it's not like I have him like wide receiver 15 or 16. It's, wide receiver 6, and I still fully expect top 40-ish kind of capital.
So it'd be fair to say that he's someone where the landing spot may be going to be more important than for some of the other guys. You said top 40. Do you think that he's pretty likely still to go in the first round, or are you getting a sense that he probably slides into those first 10 picks of round 2?
I still think he goes in the 20s, most likely. I think there's going to be a significant run of wide receivers in that range. I think the over-under expectation for wide receivers has been around for quite some time, and he's probably in that top 4. But I would not be surprised if he dropped to wide receiver 6-ish.
And then we've got to grill you here on Jalin Hyatt.
Let's do it. I know you guys are high on him, so this is fun.
Yeah, and part of it, I think, is that he's kind of the top of a new tier as opposed to being the bottom of the high tier. And so being the top of this tier that has so many questions at so many different positions. I mean, because it's not just, okay, there are questions here at receiver, you got questions at running back. Obviously, you've got crazy wide outcomes for the QBs. You've got some interesting tight ends. Hyatt, a guy where the first couple of seasons, more or less nothing. And then the final season, and for me, the final season when he's still very young and going to be an early declare and fast, which especially, and you mentioned Addison and how, his 40 time isn't a huge problem, but it's also definitely not a plus in that these small guys, you do want them to be fast much more than the big receivers. Travis, you're our college football guy, kind of big picture. Obviously, you're not writing for us now, but you're the college football guy. And so you can kind of give us a little more context for what really happened here at Tennessee that would cause such a stark contrast between those first couple of seasons and then a 2022 where, I mean, he looks like a star.
Yeah. So, I mean, Tennessee in general has been like, that's its own book. That's its own set of podcasts, just following that program, because like over the past 15 years, they've been, a dumpster fire, like putting it nicely. Like they've had all sorts of messes go on. Like the fans have deserved this past year. So congrats to them, because beating Bama finally after this mess of like a decade and a half has to feel good. And I'm not a fan, but it's been cool. Like I live in Tennessee. It's cool just to see my friends go absolutely bonkers. So anyway, but with Hyatt, going into 2021, I don't know if many people remember this, but Hyatt was like, he was on preview magazines. Like he was supposed to be the guy that was going to break out in 2021. And I don't know if you guys remember what happened to Tennessee, but they got a new coach, an offensive system, everything came in that year. Hyatt didn't do much of anything the year prior. Jeremy Pruitt was passing out bags of cash in McDonald's bags, and all this, drama ensued. He was fired. It was a mess. He tries to bring in his own transfers, blah, blah, blah. He tries to give the quarterback position to a guy who's basically Uncle Rico. That is Joe Milton. Hendon Hooker ended up getting the job and just killing it. But Hyatt didn't really kill it that year. They brought in these transfers like Velus Jones being one. Like I think he was year 6 at that point. Cedric Tillman, who'd been around, he was a big-bodied guy. They're like, hey, look, we're just gonna. Our quarterback's terrible. That at the time it was Joe Milton. He's just gonna chuck it up to you. You just gotta go get it. So he was relied upon that year. They brought in a transfer, I think, from Mississippi State even to try to make him be a thing for a hot second. And so Hyatt, where he was supposed to be hyped up and he was supposed to be this guy and he was supposed to go off, instead, the new coaching staff decided to go with some older, more proven, trustworthy wide receiver options to start the season. And so you saw guys that hadn't ever succeeded in their career go off. Like Cedric Tillman had done nothing for the most part, but he fit a role that they needed to play. And Velus Jones had done nothing in his entire career, and he went off to an extent because they just needed that particular position and his speed, I guess. Trustworthiness, I don't know what it was, but year 6 versus a year 2 guy, I could see why the coaching staff would go with him over the inexperienced Jalin Hyatt, who's trying to learn this new offense that's frankly weird and doesn't even translate to the pros. So there are reasons why Hyatt had a disappointing true sophomore campaign, and there are kind of built-in excuses there with the new system, the transfers they brought in, the mess of it. It was a lot going on for him. And then this year, of course, Cedric Tillman misses time with injury, and he was supposed to be kind of the alpha again. But Hyatt, who has all the talent in the world to be this speedster, this vertical threat, we know this. In fact, several of my leagues already had him rostered thinking he was going to go off the previous year. He actually finally lives up to the hype and is every bit the vertical playmaker that he needs to be. He's the perfect archetype to succeed in the janky offensive system, the veer and shoot that Tennessee runs. And so it's just this perfect culmination of, hey, Hendon Hooker is hitting his stride in a way that he never has in his career. This offense that dominates college and has so for over a decade is funneling everything through this one player. And it's this really just perfect culmination of all these variables coming together in favor of Jalin Hyatt succeeding and going off. And I think he has talent. I think he has speed. I think he has excellent ball tracking. and he's got now a decent peak to his analytical profile, and he's going to be an early declare, like you said. But his role doesn't exist in the pros. Like, he's going to have to, again, show up to the NFL level, completely relearn the position, essentially, and in a way that he hasn't had to do running like any kind of pro style route tree or offensive system in both, really, since he was a true freshman when he didn't even really play. And so it's going to be a major learning curve for him. So I could see a very slow breakout, some splashy plays in year one, but I just have way more questions in terms of like how his experience in the last 2 years really translates to the pros schematically. And he's basically just a go threat, like nothing else. Like, there's literally nothing that he was asked to do for the most part, except for like two-way go routes. Hey, you're going to go down the field and just change your stem in or change your stem out. Like, there's not a whole lot going on with it when it comes to the nuances of the game with Jalin Hyatt. That's where I have questions.
So with Hyatt, obviously, it feels like you might have him a little bit lower than the next guys we talk about, but you'll be able to expand on that a little bit further. But the three that I'm going to pair together are Zay Flowers, Josh Downs, and Marvin Mims. Mm-hmm. The overall question, rather than going into the specific details, is: do you feel that they're players that coming in are, overrated, underrated? Is there serious risk potential with them? And how do you have those three guys in particular ranked?
So Zay Flowers, Josh Downs, and Marvin Mims. Yeah. I think if you put any of them as a like locked in first round talent, then they're overrated, probably slightly. And if you have them if they're round 3 projections, that's probably not being nice enough. I think coming into the process of this year, looking at all 3 resumes, I was like, man, these guys would be awesome day 2 wide receivers. And Zay has risen up to he might be the wide receiver 1 in the class. And that's probably a little bit too generous. I've been high on him for quite some time, but that's probably a little bit much. Downs is just kind of like the forgotten man. Like, he's not even taking visits with teams right now, but he's got, like, his dad was an NFL running back. Like, he's got the bloodlines, he's got the talent, he's got a really safe profile. And then Mims has kind of been slept on. He was a Debbie darling for a long time, and then we just kind of moved him down the boards because we got bored, I guess. So, I mean, I like all 3. All 3 deserve probably round 2 capital. One might go round 1.
You mentioned that these guys have some similarities, and that's kind of like where we group them with elements of the size. But as you mentioned, I mean, they seem like they're being looked at very, very differently. And when you talk about Zay Flowers, potentially the top wide receiver drafted, I mean, that to me seems really odd when you look at so many of the different elements there that we want, including even the speed elements of it. But then when you watch him play, you're like, well, you can get why people like him, because right off the line, he's wide open. And there's a huge value.
Like all day. Like it. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can understand that, but so many of the things when you're talking about the top receiver, I mean, they're just not there for his profile. By contrast, I guess the one I'm interested in for just a tiny bit more detail here is why you mentioned the Debbie community and having Mims fall, and those kinds of things happen. But there is also a little bit of a tracking of the NFL community where, I'm not as plugged into what people are saying, not being on Twitter. Sure. And I like that. At the same time, I definitely don't get the vibe that Mims is being discussed in the NFL community or is being ranked as a potential, 25th overall pick, where, I mean, he's got the athleticism, he's got the vertical ability. Are people worried about similar things with Mims that you mentioned with Hyatt, where they don't think that some of the things that he does actually translate? Because, I mean, this guy seems like he could actually be, I mean, for me, if I didn't know that the NFL was down on him, he would be my number 2 behind JSN.
Wow, that's fun right there. Because I think 2 or 3 years ago, you wouldn't even be alone in that way, in thinking that, because people loved that he found success even when the Oklahoma offense was kind of falling apart. Like, even in the year where Spencer Rattler was struggling 2 years ago, and then Caleb Williams replaced him midseason, and all the other wide receivers on the team that had high pedigree, were supposed to be these freak athletes, were still struggling. We're like 10 yards per reception guys with super low dominators and nothing. And then you go to Mims and you're like, how is he averaging over 20 yards per reception in this offense? Like, he's the only thing that's working. And And he shows up to the combine and tests well, and he's got this production profile. Like, he loses his quarterback before this year and has his best year. Like, he loses the best college quarterback in football, and he has his best season ever. Like, and he is an early declare. He's got all these check boxes going for him. So I'm right there with you. That's why I think wide receiver 5 is high, like super high for people that are doing mock drafts and things like that. But I think he is rising a little bit as people take a closer look and realize, how is he different than all these smaller guys that we have around or 2 ahead of him? Because I don't think that's fair. And I think I would not be surprised at all if he's around pick 50 when it's all said and done.
And I'm still dreaming that he sneaks into that first round.
Yeah, that would be so much fun. That would be so much fun. He'd fly at boards.
Then, Travis, we have this kind of big tier of players where until we find out who the NFL is excited about, it's kind of hard to get excited about him ourselves or them ourselves. But do you have a couple of sleepers here? I'm thinking about guys like Trey Palmer, who has the transfer, has kind of the recruiting pedigree, and then has the speed. You have Rashee Rice, you have Hutchinson, Tillman. You've got the track athlete from Princeton. You've got Tyler Scott, got A.T. Perry, got Matt Leanders, who to me actually looks like a kind of an interesting, deep sleeper. But I mean, you're going to need the NFL to like one of these guys in order for them to really have value. Is that the case, or do you have somebody that you kind of like even if they go in rounds 4, 5, 6?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few guys that I like if they go in round 4 or 5, and some guys even that I think are probably going to go later that I think could pop anyway, just given their natural ability in the right spot. But you mentioned Trey Palmer at the very top there, and I think that's a name that should be higher. And I think he is rising really since the combine, and he was like the fastest wide receiver there. He has been rising somewhat in terms of mock drafts, but people really haven't gone all in just yet. And I'm not comparing him to the player, but I am saying it's similar in that I remember like how fast DJ Chark tested at the combine. And for a long time, he was still like, are we sure he's going to go inside the day 2 or whatever? And he did, and it was because the fastest wide receiver at the combine almost always, whether they're good or not, gets overdrafted. And so I think Trey Palmer, like his floor is probably pick 100, and he might go much faster. Like he might be this year's Tyquan Thornton because somebody sees the size, they see the pedigree you mentioned, they see his just. I don't know if I said size or speed. Anyway, just his track speed, and they see his just ridiculous final peak season and go, man, if I can figure that out, he's going to be on the field all day long. And so I think he was competing against top tier pedigree talent at LSU. So it's hard to break through and be the top of the target totem pole at LSU. He realized that they'd had a lot of changes within the program. He goes and gets a fresh start in Nebraska and is immediately their wide receiver 1. The coaching staff loves him. His quarterback loves him. As was quoted as saying, even before the season, like Trey Palmer's the fastest guy I've ever targeted. And his quarterback had just spent the entire previous season targeting Xavier Worthy, who, by the way, has like verified 4.4 wheels and was immediately as a true freshman one of the most productive players in the country, and made Palmer one of the most productive players in the country last year. Palmer was 40% of the offense there, and finally had an opportunity. And that's the kind of player that surprises us sometimes. They don't have the perfect analytical profile, but when they put it all together and it checks, like they check every box of athleticism and peak production, it's like, okay, that guy's going to work out. And so Palmer could be that guy.
And we have him a little bit above, I think, the consensus in the RotoViz rookie guide. So it's cool to hear you say that. Those things that you're mentioning are the things that got me excited for him as we were kind of putting the rankings together. Do you have any other, maybe one more guy? Don't even have to profile him, but somebody that people should be looking at.
Rakeem Jarrett. He was above average at a lot of areas in the combine, but that guy that isn't like 90+ percentile in something fades into the background oftentimes throughout combine season. He's got the pedigree. Coming into college, he was a 5-star wide receiver, chose to go to Maryland for some reason. But he was compared to Deebo Samuel coming into the process, and he's got a lot of fun swag. He wears the hoodie under the pads sometimes, so that automatically gives him like a full round boost for sure. But for me, he's just somebody who they struggle with quarterback play, and there was always 2 other decent wide receivers taking some targets away. In this class, there's 3 guys from Maryland that could all get drafted. So I just keep an eye on Jarrett and where he goes and the capital that he gets for sure.
Well, I still have some W shares there, so
let's hope that
that's one of the few positive notes on Jarrett that we got. So that's again good to hear.
Moving into the tight end position now, and for people who've been listening to our best ball drafts, myself and Sean, we have drafted some of Dalton, Kincaid as we get those lit round tight ends, and then in best ball we have seen some rookies over the last couple of years come in and have maybe not consistent impact, but have an impact. And there's a couple of players even from last year that are still pretty exciting. But it feels like Michael Mayer and Dalton Kincaid are up there at the top end of this class. Is that who you have at the top end? And do you have them in a clear cut tier, or have you one of those guys ahead of the other?
Yeah, I have Michael Mayer in his own tier. It just away from everybody. And I think that it should
far
be
away from everybody, or
a pretty good gap. And that might not be how it plays out with draft capital, especially because people have ever since like Daniel Jeremiah, I think, ranked him 10th overall or something in his top 50. Like everyone's like, oh yeah, that's the player I'm gonna put higher in my mock draft now, and that's just how it goes in draft season.
That can skew it a little bit.
Yeah, but Mayer, he had the 5-star pedigree coming in and just was an instant difference maker for 3 seasons in a row. It's basically Notre Dame's de facto tight end one, wide receiver one, pretty much for 3 years in a row, back-to-back 800-yard seasons. All of his production, like adjusted metrics in terms of the percentage of the offense he's taking up. It's just across the board. I have no questions. He's not like a 4-5 athlete. He's not like, oh my gosh, he's gonna fly by every single player in the secondary. But he's just that guy who's literally good at everything, and is actually faster than I think TJ Hawkinson was, and might be a better receiver than he was. I'm not saying he's a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, but he just has no questions. I have no questions with him where he doesn't have, I mean, really, like the knock on him was like, well, he doesn't have special athleticism. Like, how many like truly specially like unique athletic
they
tight ends
usually
do we have in the
play
league?
wide receiver, if that's the case.
Right, exactly. And so there's just not many like him at all that are that safe of a projection. And Kincaid, it's interesting that that the narrative, like, well, he could still get so much better. He's only played like 1 year of high school football. But he's like going to be 24. And so do the math. Like he's been around for like 4 or 5 years at this point. And he only had 1 really good season of production, like where he wasn't back up on his own team. And the only reason that he produced in the way that he did this year was because the guy ahead of him, which by the way is like a 6'2" future undrafted free agent in Brent Kuthi, he wouldn't even be a normal tight end in the NFL. Like he was ahead of him in the target totem pole last year. Like Kuthi was outproducing him, had more receptions just 1 year ago, and he goes down this year, and Kincaid goes off because Utah has no wide receiver. I could start a Utah wide receiver that I could, but like it's really bad. Like their wide receivers are not good. They don't typically have good skill position players. They had bad skill position players last year. But Cam Rising trusted him, and so you see highlight after highlight after highlight of him making some ridiculous contested catch because he's not actually open all the time, and he's the only guy to target. Like he's so a lot of production, and it was impressive. He was like one of the most productive tight ends in the country, and Utah was good. But it's not as cut and dry as like, oh man, he's just the best receiving tight end in the class. So that's probably Sam LaPorta, So it's like, I don't know. He's just not as sure of a thing that I think a lot of people were trying to make him out to be.
It's cool to hear you talk about Mayer in that way and to reinforce some of the things that are very clear in the prospect profile, but get lost, I think, when you first watch him, because you pull up highlights of the 2 guys side by side, and I mean, they don't look similar, even though you do have a couple of amazing catches from Mayer. And then you watch the combine, and I mean, You noted that his athleticism is actually not that bad, that he
Mhm.
actually looks a lot worse than the numbers are. But I mean, he looked like he was struggling to move around. And I think that can't help but as you're just watching and the way that the brain works, even though when you're fighting against it, to think, I mean, these are some red flags. I mean, maybe someone like a Jason Witten jumps to mind as a player who, I mean, didn't look like he had NFL athleticism, but is like one of the best tight ends of all time. I mean, could we be looking at that kind of a dynamic there? And even though, I mean, Gronkowski actually a fantastic athlete, but not someone who looked like a fantastic athlete when he's out there playing. It looked like he's dragging his legs behind him, and yet unstoppable.
Yeah, to me, he is exactly Zach Ertz. Like Zach Ertz wasn't an elite athlete either, and he was just a PPR monster for the tight end position. But he's just always on the good at blocking. He's too good at route running. He's too good at actually beating man coverage and playing physically and winning in the red zone and everything that you want your tight end to do. That he's just going to have like a 12+ year career and end up being the most productive bunch out of this bunch by probably a lot. But yeah, he's not like Kyle Pitts. So
well, that may be
not as sexy.
So then we look at the second tier for you here, Travis. And I mean, this is an interesting group because I mean these guys have a lot of differences, and yet the similarity is that you have Washington, Musgrave, LaPorta, whom you just mentioned. Because these guys, I mean, they're real athletes. And I mean, maybe there are some size elements to them where some of the lighter players, I mean, they need to be that athletic. But you've already given us a little bit of a teaser here. But who is the guy, and what do we need to know about some of the players where they've had interesting elements to their journey that maybe has limited the production? So that part of it is still an unknown.
Yeah, I don't know. Washington's the one where we really have to squint, analytically speaking, because like, what's his peak receiving yard market share number? Like 11%, something like 12%. I don't know what it was. It was not great, and that's mainly because he wasn't asked to be the lead tight end option there as a receiver for the past 2 years, because that's been Brock Bowers, who actually tight end one in this class if he was in it. So he'll be the tight end one next year by 20,000 miles. And so when you're sharing tight end snaps with somebody who could have been a tight end one, I don't know, 2 or 3 classes in a row, you're not going to produce a whole lot. And so, they run a lot of 12 personnel at Georgia, but they don't always funnel targets to their tight end too. So, it's not the perfect receiving profile, but the proof of concept is there in isolated moments with Washington, and he's got the 5-star background. And for those people who don't follow recruiting like I do, we didn't know where he was going to play athletically speaking. Like, we didn't know coming in for 2 years, he was like a 5-star recruit. And it was like, well, he could be an edge rusher and, destroy people's face off the edge, or that he could just convert to offensive tackle because he's as big as an offensive tackle. So we didn't know if he's going to play any of the 5 offensive line positions or an edge rusher, or if he was going to be tight end. Like, he could have gone any way and probably played at the NFL at any of those positions. And so we're just here now looking at him like, well, he's an absolute freak. Like, I don't know what to do with him still, but if they figure this out with the tight end position, he could just be around for 15 years and dunk on little tiny defensive backs that, the NFL has leaned towards for the past decade. So I really like him, and there are questions with his profile, but more than anything, Washington, I think, has a lot of questions. I like a few of the other guys, but like, I don't know what you guys have already heard with Darnell Washington. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and both fun and, Vernon Davis, for example, someone who was such a great blocker that did have to block at times. And there was even talk at one point of him becoming a tackle. Any concerns at all that, you might get a full transition there from someone you draft in fantasy?
I don't think he's actually that good of a blocker because he hasn't actually played the tackle position for the past 3 years. I think he could have gone that route had he made that switch before, but I think at this point they just realize, look, he's probably going to play at like 275 pounds, and that's okay. And if we need him to destroy the defensive end off the edge, he can, which is why I think just kind of like early last year, we saw Jelani Woods have a super high snap count right away. I think John Washington might have this second highest snap count, halfway through his rookie year of this bunch. And then that turns into receiving production down the stretch as you approach your fantasy playoffs, hopefully.
So we are obviously going to have Travis back later in the week on the Wednesday episode. We're going to talk running backs and quarterbacks, but you can follow him on Twitter at @FF_Travis M. He is the lead college football analyst over at Mojo. So I've told you where you can find him on Wednesday. That is the RotoViz Overtime podcast. So make sure you come back here and listen for that. But anything else coming up here towards the draft that you want to mention, Travis?
Well, what I've been doing since I joined Mojo is making a sports stock market, and that is a challenge. So making sure that everything is in line and all the prices are where they should be based on all the buying and selling and all the large scale data that we have. And it's been a challenge, but we have like 100 NFL prospects that will be moving basically with every draft pick on draft day. So it's going to be super exciting just running something that hasn't existed before. So I get all the questions, especially like from my friends, in person, like a sports stock market. What? Like, what do you do again? Explaining what I do is a challenge, but it's fun because I've had, even on the shows that I've joined this draft season, people have, I'm not in New Jersey, but I can use it as like a player value tool, or if they are in New Jersey, you can play because we're not like live everywhere, but jumping in and trying to predict who's going to be the draft day faller, or because you can actually go short on players and kind of bet against them now, or like who's going to be the riser. So and then me like teetering this line of not saying too much because I can't actually give like advice, like technically. it's been a lot of fun, but so yeah, just look for my stuff over at Mojo, because I do every once in a while when we have like a new release, I'll write up a bunch of players. And so if you want to learn some about, a few hundred college players here in a few weeks after the draft's done, I'll be having another release there. But you can also check out the College to Canton podcast with Stefan on RotoViz Radio, no less. So check that out. But and if you just want to talk my leg off about how I'm wrong on your favorite player, that's fine. You can find me on Twitter at FF_Travis M. But really appreciate you guys. This is just always fun talking to you too.
No, always awesome having you on. Looking forward to bringing it back for the running backs edition here and some quarterback talk on the Wednesday show. So come back, visit us then. Of course, my co-host as always is Sean Siegele. You can check out his work up on rotoviz.com. Find me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. And until we are back, have a good one.